Roman, my brother, welcome to the Superhuman Life. How's it going?
Man, I am pumped to be here. I'm super excited. We were just chatting it up, and now I'm like, dude, we should have just been recording the whole
We,
thing. We've
we
been
really
having so
should
much
have,
fun.
man. We had a 20-minute episode there prior to hitting record, but I think we'll get to a lot of that here in today's conversation.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that was super valuable for me to get a chance to meet you. Um, so yeah, man. Like I was telling you, dude, I had Anthony on the episode last week, Anthony Trucks, and in preparing and researching for you, I just saw so many parallels with both of your journeys, and we were chatting about that before recording here. So I want to get into kind of your story and journey here in a little bit, but I just wanted to share some statistics for foster care, just with people out there. We didn't get a lot into Anthony's kind of struggles because we were pressed for time, but I want to maybe dive deeper into what it was like growing up, in the 80s in foster care, but just kind of a couple alarming statistics that I was able to come across. And you can correct me if any of these are wrong. But it's estimated that 80% of incarcerated inmates in prisons right now
Yep.
has spent time in foster care. Roughly 40 to 50% of former foster youth become homeless within 18 months of leaving care. And I know we're going to tie into like how you got into the army and stuff like that. There's 7 times foster kids or people that grew up in foster care, 7 times more likely to experience depression. They're 6 times more likely to experience behavioral problems, 5 times more likely to experience anxiety. And 3 times more likely to suffer from some type of attention deficit disorder or other type of learning disability. So I think why I wanted to share those, because with you and Anthony's both, I mean, you guys could have easily been one of these statistics. You could have easily ended up, in prison, on the streets, suffering from, many of these mental health issues. But that wasn't the case. So I want to kind of take us back to, your youth and growing up, and feel free to share with us as much as you want, or as much as you're comfortable, sharing. But take us back, man, in the 80s. Like, what was it like growing up in foster care? How did you end up in a foster home? And then just kind of we'll go from there, and it'll get us into, Army Interrogator and how that has led you to business consulting and Real Talk with Roman and all of just the amazing things that you're producing into the world now.
For sure, man. So I will actually add another statistic to that list that you just rattled off too. So it's estimated that around 1% of foster kids get a post high school degree. And that's even if they graduate high school, right? The numbers are like right around 50%, depending, and they vary a little bit state by state if you do it, but on average, 50% to even graduate high school, right? So then you take that 50%, you reduce it down to 1% to get any kind of higher education degree. And then now let's talk about masters and doctorates, right? You're talking about 1% of 1%. So those numbers are extremely small. And for me, I didn't think I was going to get any kind of degrees. My wife is a master degree in education, and she does bilingual education. So not necessarily foster kids that she worked with, but she worked with a lot of like impoverished youth and things like that. So definitely some parallels there as we moved into our relationship. And she kind of pushed me when I got out to get those things, not just for me, not just for our son, but because there's a lot of foster kids who don't do it and they need to see somebody that can. So that's the future state story. But to take it back to the beginning, yeah, man, my mom gave me and my sister up at 3. And the reason I say my sister is because there's 2 important things about that. Later in my story, after I dealt with my traumas and addressed it, me and my sister reconnected. But at the 80s, when I was going through the foster care system, and she's actually coming over for Thanksgiving, so she'll be here tomorrow, but so totally detracted there. But at the time that I was in the foster care system, family unification that you hear about now was not necessarily a thing. Like, it was really trying to get you into a home as quickly as possible. Because just like the system's overwhelmed now, the system was overwhelmed then. The difference was the science wasn't really out so much about, the connections and things like that. So I was older. I was around 3 and she was around 2. So she went into a family, got adopted very quick. Statistically, young girls at that time were faster adopted than boys, right? So, I mean, like, and that's not to detract from it. We both have very different stories, but we both have come together and found each other and have really good lives. So I'm not upset about that in any way, shape, or form. And I'm extremely happy because now that we're connected, I have a sister, and overnight I gained a sister and 4 nephews. So, I mean, like, it grew from not having any family to all of a sudden here I am with like a sister and nephews, right? And her parents and all of that kind of stuff that want to have, us around and in their life. And there's their own little things to work through from that. But side note, kind of again, future stated it, but we got separated. I went through the home, bounced to over a dozen homes. I like to say some were less than ideal, right? Because there were forms of abuse, whether it was mental or physical. I've had, various kinds of trauma at all levels. And it's not the fault of any particular person other than the people who did it, because the foster care system was and still is really overworked. Caseworkers are overworked and underpaid. I mean, you literally can go online right now in pretty much whatever state you're in, and you can help them sort through case files because they have so many. So literally the overload is so large that they will allow anybody to volunteer and help out, right? So that tells you something right there. And it wasn't any different when I was a kid. So I was bouncing around to these homes, and it really created what I like to call this chameleon identity. I had no identity. I would be whatever people wanted me to be, because I wanted to be safe. I wanted to have a family. I wanted to not get, kicked out of a home. I wanted to not get abused. And so I would do these things that I thought would make people love me or like me, or at a minimum, not hurt me. Right. And then it gets even worse because then you go into good homes, right? So let's say you walk into an ideal home. The family, for whatever reason, can't take you in. And I was actually just talking about this the other day with someone on their podcast, and basically saying, like, as a 5-year-old, if you're in a home and they can't take you, let's say, a job falls through or a father dies in their household and they have to take in the mother or whatever else, right? And they're just not able to, right? Their situation changes. You as a 5-year-old don't understand that. All you know is, yet again, someone was picked over you, right? And when that happens, the safe answer becomes not to get attached to anybody, not to get attached to anything, not to love people. So at a very young age, right, we know that our young developmental years are super important. So now picture that, me going through one of the most traumatic experiences, because moving is listed in the top 3 most traumatic, and most people will move maybe 1 or 2 times by the age of 18. The average foster kid will move 8 times in less than a year. So let's talk about like let's unpack what that does developmentally to you, right? And then let's pack in that you're going into homes that some are good and some are bad, right? So your emotional, kind of like what we were talking about, like wiring of the brain and your chemical balance, like all of that is screwed up before you even start diving into the traumas that happen to you going through your formative teen years in school, right? Because you're the foster kid, you're different, right? Or whatever else that you experience. So for me, it was a very rocky path, and it just led to me becoming emotionally distant. My idea was, if you don't get attached to people, if you don't emotionally connect to people, if you don't do any of that, it's great for you because no one can ever hurt you. But the downside to that, what no one tells you, is that also hurts you when you do try to finally get into relationships, because you have no clue how. Because where everyone else has been learning how to love and be appreciated, you've learned how to push people away. Now, with that, I'm not going to say that there weren't people who tried to love me throughout my experience. There were. The problem was I couldn't see it and I couldn't receive it. And that's just as important. You have to, and I say this when I go speak at foster homes, you have to love yourself, you have to love others, but most importantly, you have to let others love you. Like, you have to allow that, because it's a back and forth. It's an exchange, just like a conversation, just like anything else. So really and truly, that put me in a really messed up place. I got adopted in about 9 or 10 and got put into a home, very Christian, ultra religious home. And it was less than ideal yet again. And so by the time that as soon as I could get out of there, I wanted to get out of there. Just the mental abuse, the things that were happening, it just wasn't ideal for me. It wasn't what I wanted to be a part of. And I'm not going to say that again. I'm not going to say that I was completely innocent and all that. I was a very messed up foster child. So I brought some of that, but that doesn't alleviate the blame of the people in that environment as well, right? They did actions and things that perpetuated those cycles. And so for me, it got to a place where the only option was to get away. And I'd watched war movies growing up, and you see like the brotherhood and the camaraderie and the family, and like dudes would literally run into waves of bullets to get their friends. And I was like, I want that. Like, I want that kind of connection, because I'd never really had it. And so I mean, the guy that I was on with the other day, he jokingly said, "You were a recruiter's wet dream." Because I walked into the office and I was like, dude, I just want to join the army. I want to get brotherhood and I want to be out of here. And he was like, got you. Right. And so we took the test. I scored really high on it. And he said, the recruiter there said, "Hey, we have an opening for interrogation and we're going to give you $10,000. 18-year-old being given $10,000. It's like gold. And so I was like, done. And so that moved me into the journey of Interrogator. But yeah, before that, it was just bouncing around from home to home. And again, remember, I'm an older brother, and I've never interacted with my sister when I moved into foster care, right? So I always knew that I had a younger sister. I never knew where she was, what she was doing, what was happening in her life. So now add that additional trauma, right? Because you see older brothers looking out for their siblings and being there, and you have no idea who your sibling is, right? So all these emotional and mental connections are just kind of jacked up in my head as a kid, because my experience is completely different, like, than what you would call the ideal home or the ideal lifestyle, quote unquote.
Was your birth mom completely out of the picture? I mean, once she put you guys into foster care, that was kind of it? She washed her hands, and you never heard from her again?
She completely washed her hands of us. My sister, so now that I've connected with my sister, she did some more kind of searching, and it's kind of cool because all of her searching was geared towards finding me, and she found my mother and stuff like that, because that was the easier find, right? And so she found them, and that got her, she saw them, and they very, very much were, our mom was like, no, yeah, I put you up for adoption. We're not doing this. Like, I didn't want to connect with y'all. And my records were sealed. So I didn't have anything. I never had anything when I turned 18. Usually when you turn 18, you get a file, right? But if your file's sealed, you get a file that's pretty much a bunch of redacted paperwork. So it's literally like getting just fuel for a fire is essentially what it is.
Yeah. Now, have you connected with her since kind of rekindling the relationship with your sister, or is this something you're kind of like, I don't even want to know? I'm kind of, where are you at with your mom?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I'll preface that with kind of talking about childhood, right? So growing up in foster care, and I think a lot of foster people will relate, when you're growing up, you have this idea that your real parents are going to come into the foster home or into those homes and like, an amazing Cadillac and like all this great stuff. And they're just going to come sweep you up and you're going to go live this amazing life. Right. Like they just needed time to make the ideal life for you. Right. Like that's kind of the mentality. And that never happened. And so for a long time, I was bitter to her about that. But truthfully, I think now it's more sympathetic to her. So I wouldn't mind seeing her. Like, it doesn't, one way or another, it doesn't really matter to me, because I know, and now being a parent myself, right? And that's a whole different thing to unpack, but being a parent myself, you do everything with the best interest of your child. And so I guess the one thing that I want to maintain of her is that hopefully she made the decision to put us up because she knew she couldn't handle it. And maybe she doesn't want to be around us because that's too much for her, right? Like, that's kind of how I want to see it. And when I was young and angry and bitter to her, I used to call her like a cracked out drug whore. Like that's how I viewed her and envisioned her, right? And my vision of her has changed over the years. But really and truly, I mean, there's not some magical, like, okay, we're now going to be together and be a family and she's going to interact in my son's life. Like, there's just almost too much water under that bridge. Like, you can forgive a person and not have to do life with that person.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real important thing for people in foster care to understand.
Yeah, that's such an amazing perspective you have, and clearly shown like you've done a significant amount of work of really working on some of these emotions and on the trauma. I want to kind of go back to that piece where you said like the average person will maybe move 3 times before the age of 18, but a foster kid will move up to 8 times in a year. I've never heard or even thought about it under that perspective. But when you kind of think about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like we have, food, water, rest, it's kind of sits there down there at the bottom. Number two being kind of your safety or security. So literally right there from the needs of a human being for what makes us feel safe and secure in the world as a foster kid, is like you're missing the second most important one. And I could just, and I think now I understand some of these statistics of just kind of that uncertainty in life, how it's going to lead to anxiety, fear, depression. I mean, it literally I know so many of us can't even possibly get in that perspective of realizing what that level of uncertainty is, but super, super alarming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, exactly. Well, even think about that perspective a little bit differently, right? So the drugs, the homelessness, all of that, right? So homelessness, you never feel like you have a home. So part of the reason that I got to a place where I stepped out and had an affair on my wife was we had just bought a house. I was like 25 years old, making crazy bank, doing amazing things, and closing on a house and paying like a big chunk of it up front and all of this, right? Like in anyone's eyes, I was living the life, like debt free, doing it all of this. And to me, I'm like, dude, I've never, and even in the military, right? I'm constantly moving, constantly deploying. So I've never had four walls around me that are mine. So now take that years of trauma that I haven't unpacked, and now all of a sudden I'm in a house that's mine.
Unconsciously, you just got to go mess it up.
Yeah. And so for foster kids, there's a little bit of that too, right? And I'm not going to say my story is every foster kid's story, because it's not. But truth be told, like, why do we have addictive personalities? Because we're constantly chasing happiness. We're constantly chasing an emotion that we didn't have growing up. Like, why do you turn to drugs? Why do you turn to porn? Why do you turn to alcohol? Why do you turn to anything, right? Because there's a void. Now, what you just said, right? Number two, from the very core essential beginning of a foster child's life, is missing. So what do you think they're chasing in their whole life? Why do you think they're jumping in and out of relationships as fast as they can? Why do you think they're either having sex with as many people as possible in a meaningless way, or, manipulating people as much as they can? Because that's the only way they're getting a high, a feeling, an emotion, right? Like, so
they're tied to their brain, as we were talking offline, is the wiring. They're wired for trauma. They're wired for uncertainty. They're wired for this feeling of like, I don't like that things are going good right now. Something's got to be messed up. And if somebody's not going to do it,
it's better that I mess it up.
Exactly.
Because I can control what I mess up.
Wow. What an amazing kind of perspective shift there.
And I'm a runner, so I will tell you, quote unquote, like, I like to run outside, but I'm also like an emotional runner. When shit gets hard for me, I know, like, my personality is to run. Whether running is backing away from a conversation and walking out and just not talking to people, or running for me is I'm gonna burn this mother down and I'm out and you'll never hear from me again, right? Like, that's me. And I still have to work on it. I still have to keep it in check, because no matter how much you unpack the traumas that you've gone through, they're still there. They still exist, right? Like, the things that happened to me as a kid, from the physical abuse, the mental abuse, sexual abuse, all of those things still exist. Like, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and they're going to be gone. All that I can do is wake up every day and say, I know what these are. I know what my triggers are, and I'm going to move past them. And I think that's one of the biggest things in foster care that we can all get better at. And I think people who've gone through the system have the obligation to tell people, but I also think the system as a whole needs to get better about teaching children in the system that it's okay that you had trauma. It's not your fault. If anything, it can make you stronger in some ways. I'm not justifying the trauma in any shape or form. Like, I am happy that my sister did not go through the traumas that I went through, right? Like, I will trade not knowing her for the first half of my life to know that she had a good first half of her life, right? Like, that's a trade-off I'll make.
Yeah. So what have those conversations been like between the two of you? In terms of, like, not comparing your upbringings, but from what it sounds like you're saying, what it sounds like you're saying, like, she landed in a much better situation than you did. So was she, like, at that young age, was the first family, like, was she adopted younger than you, or did she have to bounce around from house to house to house? She
didn't really bounce. She got adopted pretty quick. And we do talk about it. We do kind of compare it, right? And she definitely does feel really bad about the way that my lifestyle went, because, I host a podcast called Real Talk, right? So if I'm gonna have a sister, I gotta tell her like what happened to me, right? So we've had these conversations, and she's like, I wish I could go up to those people and just like beat them up and stuff like that. And that's not to say that she hasn't had her share of traumas too, right? Like her life hasn't been a walk in the park. No one's life has, right? So foster kids don't own the book on trauma. Military doesn't own the book on trauma, right? Like we don't, but it's definitely a different type of trauma. So she's had her issues too as well that she's had to work through, but she had a stable family environment, right? She had a home. She had that safety. It was in a small town with a college or a high school filled with friends that she's still friends with today, right? She's her husband's in the military. Her family's right down the road from them, right? So it's one of those where it's a very different. Like I made it all on my own. And when I say all on my own, I mean, I didn't have a home or a family to fall back on. Like there was no, and that's not to say that everything's been given to her. It's simply to say that just the concept of knowing that there's someone in your corner does something for you. Like, let me put you in a boxing ring with no coach behind you. And then let me put you in a boxing ring with a coach behind you. There's going to be a noticeable difference, right? Because they see things that you don't see. They communicate with you. They're there, right? And so just that presence means something. So I think ultimately that's kind of the biggest difference between her and I. Not that she didn't have any trauma or, her life was just $1 million Rolexes and stuff like that. It was really that kind of like you said, that fundamental need of safety and security and home was present. And so she had that. So she didn't have to chase after that. I chased after that. And chasing after that is almost like chasing the dragon, right? Like you're going to go down some dark paths in doing it.
So you said that, I mean, literally right out of high school, like you were ready, you walked in the recruiter's office, like, pen in your hand, ready to sign your life over. You were seeking this fellowship. I want to just go back a little bit here. So from 9, you were adopted to 9 into this family. Like who was Roman, through high school, like was he into sport? Was he, was he just skipping school as much as possible? Just kind of who was he?
Kind of all of that, right? So I liked sports. I liked baseball more so than anything else. I loved speaking, right? So I actually was, I did debate and extemporaneous speaking. So I so badly wanted to join the military and get away from my home that I had qualified. So FFA, it's like Future Farmers of America. And so they had an extemporaneous speaking. So I qualified. I got first in district and regional and all that, right? So I qualified to go compete, and then first at state, and then qualified to compete at the national level. To compete at the national level, right? And I'm just going to say, I probably could have won it, right? Like I could have won it. But point being, I wanted to join the military and get out of that home so bad that I gave up the opportunity to compete at the national level. And I don't regret that. Like, this is not me saying like, oh my gosh, it's like the worst decision of my life. Best decision of my life, hands down, right? Because now look at me today. I'm still speaking on a huge platform, on a national platform, on a global platform, right? So I'm not heartbroken about that, but that just gives you the insight of how much I was willing to sacrifice to get out of where I was.
Got it. And we could say globally, because this conversation just in of itself will reach people in over 50 different countries. So
there we go.
Yeah, feel free, man. We'll say global speaker 100%. So fresh out of high school, we joined the military. What are those first couple months of, or, first couple weeks of a boot camp like? Here you are, foster kid, no real safety, no real security, probably kind of figuring, I'm just going to do whatever I want. Now you get thrust into this completely different environment of like a drill sergeant down your face. So what were those first couple, months or weeks like, and how were you able to kind of,
yeah. So again, key statement, I was a chameleon, man. Like I could fit into anywhere. So I am a very anti-authority, right? I'm very much so, which is so funny because when I talk to people, they're like, the military taught you discipline. It did. But I also worked as an interrogator, got to support special operations. I mean, I was going around in a beard and regular clothes. Like I was doing a lot of cool stuff. So rules didn't quite apply the same way. There were still some fundamental ones that did, but there were officers who thought that I was like something totally different than what I was, right? Because I wasn't in a typical uniform. You couldn't see what my rank was, things like that. But back in the basic days, I just basically just shut up and kind of did it, right? Because as a chameleon, I knew, and like as a person who'd been hit before, right? Because that's all basic is doing. It's breaking down who you fundamentally are to be who they need you to be. And then rebuilding you in a way that is more in line with what they need. And so for me, with no identity, it was kind of perfect, right? There's really nothing to break down. So it was just kind of like, now absorb all of this. And I'm like, okay, cool. And so I just shut up and took it. And people were like, this is sucky. And there were always people who wanted to fight back, right? And every now and then I did. And especially as I got like a little older and a little more of an ego, I fought back more. But starting out, man, I just kind of shut up and took it because I was like, yeah, no. Like, because I wanted it so badly. I was like, dude, you could break all my legs and tell me I still have both my legs and tell me I have to run. I'll figure it out because this is the only way that I can get something. Like, I'm going to get it. And so for me, I just shut up and took it. Now, as I got further into it, then I started to like talk back and be a little insubordinate and stuff like that, because I then grew an ego becoming really good at what I did. Because again, back to the chameleon thing, like I could walk into a room with anybody and talk to them and find commonality. And I was so emotionally disconnected. Like people could tell me heartbreaking stories and I'd go right out, throw a dip in and be like, yo, like, what are we going to go eat? Like, I'm hungry. And they're like, dude, that guy just told you like his whole family died. And I'm like, all right, whatever, let's go. Like, you know, like I was so, and that's the other thing the military didn't tell me, right? And this is not everyone's interrogation story, but when you have a life of trauma and emotional detachment, and then you go into manipulating and interrogating and building relationships with sources and things like this all the time, it's just literally packing trauma on top of trauma, then add deploying, losing friends, all of this. Like I literally was making like a trauma cake. And the average male, right, their brain is developing until the age of 25, right? So I'm deploying for my first time at 19 years old, second time at 21, right? Like this is literally like my formative years are all trauma.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's once again just the perspective there. But I gotta imagine here with this chameleon piece, and if we can, if we can maybe get into some of the stories of interrogation. I don't know how much you're able to share, but I gotta assume that there's something about your ability to kind of be that chameleon and connect with and just relate to so many people probably helped you in your role as an interrogator, because when you're having those conversations and like your ability to kind of maybe, mirror them, getting into some NLP stuff here, which I'd love to kind of get your take and thoughts are. But so what did, what did, your training for interrogation, give you back then? And if you can you kind of share with us, maybe the most fascinating story, or, just the one that'll make for kind of a best audio conversation here.
Yeah. So I tell this one story because it's kind of super funny, right? Because so when I say I'm an interrogator, one of the first questions that always comes up is, what is it like to waterboard people? Right? Like that's one of the first things people go to, because Zero Dark 30, Jason Bourne, all of that created like a very unrealistic expectation of what human intelligence is. And so as far as training, like I did it all. I mean, I learned basic and advanced read interrogation technique. I learned how to analyze handwriting. So people could write statements and I could identify what kind of, like by the verbiage that they used, was it factual or not? Did they embellish? What did they kind of lessen the part on? So what were they kind of like obscuring inside of the writing and things like that? And by the heaviness of the pen stroke and different things like that. Like, so there's a whole science behind it. And, but there's also an art behind it, right? Because communication is something everyone does. And this is one of the other big things I say, like, we're all communicators. We're just not all effective communicators, right? And so there's like a little art and nuance and science and put together, and then every person's a little bit different, right? So back to the original story, the story is the guy who gave me the most information on one of my very first deployments was a guy who was detained inside of a facility, and I would bring him into my building every week to interrogate, and I would give him a cheeseburger and a notepad, and I'd let him draw and eat cheeseburgers. And he'd draw crazy stuff. Like some days he'd draw like his wife and his kids and whatever, right? And other days, so one day he was telling me about this guy, and so when you go through the schoolhouse, they kind of teach you like this fundamental way to question. And I'm not going to get too much into the tradecraft of that. But one of the things is like describing a person, right? So let's say that he was describing you, he'd say, muscular build, a mustache that hangs down to the beginning of his lips, like,
handsome,
like, handsome, breathtaking, right? Like things like that, right? That would be the description. And so you would kind of build this like mimic drawing off of that. And this was back when they had like the old school computer editing software where you would like build people. Yeah. So not at all like what we have today, where you can just like plug it into an iPhone and it builds something. But I'm not jealous that I didn't have that technology at all, right? But point being, he did that. So he was saying all that, and I'm getting him to like to describe this guy down to like his ears and everything. And so I do this, I run through this whole thing with him. And then he's like, do you just want me to draw him for you? So like I've spent like an hour getting him to describe what this dude looks like. And he's like, I can draw him for you, man. Like I just draw him. And I'm like, dude, seriously? And so it was kind of there's a lot of lessons in there from, pay attention to what your person can do, maybe start with, hey, could you like draw a picture of this guy? Very simple things. But it just goes to show that it's not all this crazy, like, oh my gosh, like kind of questioning or like good cop, bad cop and shining lights in their eyes and stuff like that. Sometimes it's really as simple as, dude, let me give you a cheeseburger and, let me take advantage of the skills you have. And so he drew a picture of that guy's face. He drew a layout of the dude's entire compound, and he drew a map from where we currently were to where that dude was with like traffic circles and everything. So I took it into this building and gave it to these people to look at, and they were like, yo, this is like spot on. We could build a whole op off of just these 3 drawings. And I'm like, awesome. And so then that kind of ties into the next part, right? So there's those type of interrogations that exist where you do it inside of a facility and it's very calm and relaxed. And I mean, it can also be tense as well, but for the sake of time, that's kind of the example. And then for the other end, there's, dropping off of a helo, going into a house, breaching a door, like kind of what you see on TV, that shock and awe, right? Dude gets his door blown in and he's like freaking out. Well, then somebody has to talk to that guy, right? Like you never see that in the movie, right? Or if you do, you see like a guy talking to him with like a gun in his face, right? Which the point that I make there is go up to a coworker at work and just punch them in the face and then ask them a question, right? Be like, did you take my cookie out of the break room? They're either going to punch you back or they're going to like run away, right? Like human nature is fight or flight. And so when someone's kind of gone through that kind of shock, right? They can either be extremely mean and, not want to talk to you and abrasive and things like that, but you still have an objective. You still have to get somewhere, right? So you have to find a way to ramp them down. And so everyone thinks that it's just all this, like just high speed, high adrenaline. And there are moments, like I'm not saying that there aren't, dude. I'm an adrenaline junkie, but sometimes it's really as simple as telling a person, hey man, like, it's okay. We didn't come into this house for you. I have questions for you, right? Like just help me out here. Help me understand why we came to this place and we were told it was where bad people stay, but you're here and you're a good person, right? Like kind of playing to their ego and things like that. So there's a lot more science and nuance, and you get kind of like the saying goes, you get a lot further with honey than vinegar, right? And so there's really not. And I'm not going to sit here and say that torture doesn't exist, right? We've all seen the videos and we know, right? And movie magic comes from somewhere. But what I'm saying is that was not really my experience. More often than not, I was trying to ramp people down who had just watched their doors get blown in. Just think about you individually. How would you feel if someone just came in and blew your house in and then started asking you questions?
Oh, you'd be in defensive mode right away. Well,
yeah.
First off, if you know you did something wrong, you're probably going to try to run.
Yeah.
You're like, why are these people coming after me? Let me get out of here.
Right.
But I mean, that's, what you're saying here. Like that's really the case with everything. It's like, yeah, what we want to see and what makes for great television is never really the truth behind it. I mean, we can look at the sports world, for example. I mean, the 2 hours or 3 hours on Sunday, that's like 4% of the player's week. That's where we get the most excitement out of, but there's years and months of training and, years years of practice and weightlifting and all this other work and rehab work and nutrition and sports psychology and all this other stuff that they have to do behind the scenes to be able to create this product. And it's not the perfect analogy here, but
no, it really is, because so before one of my first deployments, we went to a place and it's called Mirror Image. And essentially what we did is a bunch of people who were ex-CIA operatives had, done a lot of like buybacks and source ops and things like that in Iraq and Afghanistan, and did like a lot of work with Al-Qaeda and stuff. They basically ran us through like a terrorist immersion camp. So our off season was pretending to be terrorists. Like we were literally getting inside of the head of what it was like to be a terrorist, right? Like, because that's really what it is. If you can, let's go back to Sun Tzu, right? Understand your enemy, right? So if you can do that, if you can kind of put yourself in their shoes, the conversation has become a little bit more easier, right? You start to understand what a typical day looks like for them. So then when you're asking them about a typical day and they tell you something that's off base, you can be like, hey, wait a minute. Like that sounds weird. Clarify. Which very well, there may be a logical explanation or there isn't, but at least you have a baseline to go off of. You have somewhere to go. So yeah, man, it's all about the off season. We spent more time training and doing it and practicing it and going out to bars and practicing interrogation techniques, like getting people's numbers, getting people to tell us like facts about their family or where they lived or stuff like that. What seemed like meaningless information to them, but truthfully, it was just honing our skills. And I don't necessarily condone that for anybody to that level of manipulation, because again, like I was doing it from a place with zero emotional attachment, crazy trauma. So all I did was help me objectify people even more. So.
Yeah. I want to get into now, like, post-military and some of the stuff you're doing now, but I got to ask the question because you entered into the military for brotherhood or fellowship. So is there anybody from that initial kind of boot camp that is still in your life? Like, did you create the lifelong friendships that you were seeking?
Oh yeah, definitely. A few from boot camp, not so much, but a lot from deployments, right? There's people I could call today who I know would be here tomorrow, right? Like and this is the first time he won't be here, but my buddy, he's a Marine. He did like MARSOC, Force Recon kind of stuff. And he just won't be here because of COVID, but usually every year we come, he sits out, we talk, and he hangs out with me and my wife and my kid now. And we just kind of like enjoy it and kind of swap some old stories and kind of go back to those days and talk about it. And it's a lot of fun. But I mean, I have another friend who's a fitness guy. He did multiple deployments with me and he now has a podcast, right? Like I had to push him kicking and screaming, but he's got a podcast. It's called Relentless Fitness. You guys should totally check it out. But yeah, man, like I have tons of lifelong friends. Now, that's not to detract from the fact that I have my share of issues. I have my share of bad people that I connected with. But man, I wouldn't trade my military experience for the world.
That's awesome. How long did you serve for?
So I did 6 years active and I did 2 years as a contractor.
Man, well, thank you for that, and thank you for opening up and sharing some of that experience with us. So let's talk about that transition out. I think and somebody I want to connect you with is Kyle Mason, who we had way back, but we talked about the problem with porn in the military and then kind of that transitioning period out. And, he struggled with some depression and, he struggled with not being able to really get back to normal life and, had some issues within his marriage. He brought porn back from the military into his marriage. It ended up really just, ripping the family apart. So I don't want to talk too negatively about kind of how the military kind of helps soldiers or helps, these men transition back into life. But what was that experience like for you, just transitioning back to kind of civilian life?
Yeah, man, I'll bash them, but I'll bash them with the statement of saying like, it's as much my fault as theirs. They didn't do a great job transitioning. They're doing better. I definitely will say that. So, but also, I mean, so my transition, like one piece before that. So the porn thing is absolutely right. I mean, we used to trade hard drives at the end of deployments that were just packed with porn, like literally like all kinds from like crazy bondage stuff to like, whatever else, insert anything else. Right. And then like, you're high ramped adrenaline, right? Then you're watching porn. Like none of it's healthy, right? Chemical imbalance out the wazoo, right? So we could dive into that completely separately. But point being, yes, that definitely exists, and it's definitely an issue, and it definitely impacts transition, right? But to take it more towards the military piece and the actual part of it, I went to ACAP and I actually skipped a lot of days of it. So ACAP is a military's transition program. I just come back from deployment. I actually missed a bunch of classes, didn't do a lot of it that I was supposed to. But also when I would go sit in the room, I'd sit in there with people who were married and had their spouse in there with them, helping them, right? Walking through the documents with them, oh, I'm going to take this, you take that, right? Like teamworking the shit out of it. And then and that's not to bash them. That's great for them. Right. And then I had other people who were like retired colonels or were going to retire as colonels. And were like, yeah, I've already got a job with a Fortune 500 lined up. Like, I just need to know how to do my medical paperwork and I'm out. Right. Then you've got me, no degree, multiple deployments, no experience outside of just being an interrogator. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? Like, what am I doing in here? Like, what, like, am I even making the right choice getting out? And so, yeah, man, I just kind of backed away. I kind of avoided it. Right. So again, I'm a runner. Right. So the first thing I did was run. And what did I run into? This friend of mine said, hey man, we're going to Afghanistan. We need some contractors. I can hook you up with a company. You can be on a plane. By the time, before you can even finish out processing, we could have you a flight date. And I'm like, done, dude. And so I go right back out to what I already knew, right? So all that did was hurt me. But I will say the one good thing the Army did was when I transitioned, they told me to build a LinkedIn account for no other reason than it gave me connection to other veterans. And I didn't use it up front, but it definitely, when the time for me to transition came, it definitely gave me access to a network of people like Rob Renz, Rich Cardona, Jason Van Camp. I mean,
what year is this?
So for me, this transition was in 2013. Okay. Connecting with veterans really coming out of LinkedIn, that was probably around 2016.
That's in the very early infancy years of LinkedIn. I'm trying to think. I was on LinkedIn 2010, 2011. I was working in the recruiting industry at the time, and we were like some of the first ones to really be using it. So
yeah, and then I noticed it kind of take shape because veterans started realizing, hey, transition sucks, and veterans are transitioning into the workplace with no clue what to do. And so people started going on LinkedIn and saying, like, I remember some of the early videos, people saying like, hey, are you having trouble finding a job because you can't translate your skills, right? And now there's people, you can throw a rock and hit somebody who can help you translate your military skills. And that's not a bad thing, right? Like, I'm not bashing that because different people resonate with different folks, right? There's enough pie for everyone. Collaboration over competition, right? Whatever mantra you want to put in there. But the point being is, yeah, man, it was extremely rough. And so I literally transitioned, went right back to doing exactly what I did. So I didn't really transition. But by the time that I got out of contracting, people expected me to understand how to be a civilian. But I'd never done it. I had no clue. And so what did I do? Again, I ran. I went home and I did, a year straight as a just drinking and playing PlayStation in my room or in my apartment with my wife going to school and stuff like that. And it was just, man, it was wild. It was just this rough period where all I was doing was drinking, which was just negative for me and painful. And I mean, I've got stories of me going into restaurants and completely making a jerk of myself and killing my relationship with my wife. And it got to a place where, I stepped out of my marriage because, again, I was trying to run and I hadn't dealt with any trauma, right? Trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And I've never dealt with any of it, right? And now I'm in a relationship with another person and she's inherited my baggage, right? With no clue that she was going to inherit it. So that's a lot to put on a person.
You meet her while you were in the military?
So I met her, while I was in the military, and right before I went back out to deploy again, right? So she saw me at my absolute worst. I mean, I had just come back from a deployment. We started dating when I was like broken down from a deployment. And then instead of, getting better, I went right back out and deployed again. So she's like, and honestly, with that 2 years straight that I did in Helmand, I did it never took leave, never took a break or anything like that. And I actually called her from a sat phone and said, hey, I'm going to Iraq. I'm just going to jump on another plane. ISIS was starting to pop off in 2015. And so I was like, hey, I'm just going to go over there. They've got some stuff popping and I know the area. I'm going to go do that. And she was like, are you kidding me? Like, I haven't seen you in 2 years and you're just going to go to another country again? Like, how long are you going to be there? I was like, I don't know, until we take care of the problem there. Right. Because again, I'm running, right. I'm just bam, bam, bam. And she was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to wait for that. And when I first came home, I was super bitter because she pulled me away from that. But truth be told, it was the greatest thing ever, because I would have either burned myself out or gotten killed. Like, one of the two would have happened. So
when did the journey to kind of start working through, some of the childhood trauma and some of these other, issues? Like, when did that journey start for you?
Yeah. So like I said, I stepped out of my marriage. The walls closed in on me, and that was pretty much the point, right? My wife, when we were in the process of getting a divorce, we separated and we're looking and thinking about divorcing. Both of us were, and I was in an apartment by myself, and all I had was a Glock and nothing else. All walls were empty, everything like that. So, gun in my mouth, like thinking about, hey, this is where it ends, And I just, something made me not want to do it. I was like, I can beat this. I can be better than this. I can do better than this. And I did. And it was rough. I had to go to therapy. I went to therapy for the first time. And then the therapist was like, yeah, dude, you literally just packed. And that's where kind of my trauma on top of trauma comes from, is him and I unbundling it. And then me and a lady at a future state, like both of them unbundling with me. They were like, dude, you just packed so much trauma into such a developmental time. Like, you've got to unpack it now. You've got to pull it out. You've got to address it. Right. And it was rough, like I had to, address abuses that I'd encountered. I had to, cut out some toxic relationships from my life. I had to start journaling, and I knew all of these things about how to have effective communication, but I never had it. Right. I didn't have it with myself. I didn't have it with my wife. I wasn't really having it with my friends, right? So they were all seeing the people they wanted to see. And I was living my marriage by that mantra, happy wife, happy life. Total bullshit. Like, and both individuals have to be happy, and you constantly have to be working on bettering yourself towards a goal. And that's kind of what happened, right? We both kind of acknowledged that there were faults, but definitely more so faults on my end. And man, it was a rough journey. A lot of journaling, a lot of late nights talking to my wife. I took a break from drinking, and I never really came back to it. I mean, I still drink a little bit, but not near to the level I did. I mean, I used to do like chug challenges, drink Jameson out of the bottle, right? Like stupid stuff like that. But now, very rare that I'm really drinking more than like a beer or a scotch at a time. And that was essentially, it was just a breakdown. It was an understanding that I'm not who I want to be. I'm not where I want to be. And then part of addressing that trauma got me to speaking to other kids in foster care, hoping that I could keep them from making the mistakes that I made. Right. And part of it was finding my identity. I had no identity. I was Roman, the foster kid. I was Roman, the interrogator. I was Roman, every person wanted me to be. But who was really Roman? Well, Roman was a person who enjoyed helping people, who enjoyed talking, who enjoyed having conversations, but just never felt safe that he could, right? And so that's essentially what I started doing, is finding the things I was passionate about and doing them.
Yeah, it's like this chameleon ability that maybe served you, growing up in some places, served you as your role in the interrogator, the ability to connect with and have these conversations with all these different individuals. So it served you one place, but it really became your downfall in real life, because you never were the Roman that Roman Roberts is. You were the Roman that you thought you needed to be for each individual kind of situation. And I know for me, my story has really been a very similar. I mean, not obviously I don't have all the experiences, and I didn't go through the military, but because I was running from an internal kind of insecurity or an internal demon, like when I showed up in relationships, or when I showed up in fitness, or when I showed up, to create content or YouTube or whatever it was that I was doing, like I wasn't myself. And over time, it literally like rotted away the inside of me, because the person I'm putting out into the world is not the person that's living on the inside. And it wasn't until I was able to really get congruence in those two that we now have the Superhuman Life podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I think that's in so many stories, for people. I want to acknowledge you. I really appreciate you kind of sharing that apartment moment. I think I know that's hard to kind of face. We've talked with, suicide and attempted suicide. And there's been a lot of depression conversations, obviously, with the work that we do here with addiction. So I really appreciate you. I definitely do need to get you connected with Kyle and John, though. So they have a podcast called Beyond the Barrel. And it's really about bringing more awareness to it. I think the number is 22 veterans a day. So they're kind of built in that whole kind of mission of just bringing more awareness to the real harmful.
I mean, I think COVID now has taught us too that we need to just bring awareness to suicide, man. Like, it's no longer a military issue. And I think for a lot of military people, and I was talking about this with Rocco the other day when he was on my show, and he started a veteran company called Veteran. And basically, we as veterans have been dealing with suicide for a very long time. And it's been an issue that's plagued us, but we're starting to figure out how to deal with it. We're starting to figure out how to help people. Are we perfect at it? No. Is anyone perfect at anything? Fuck no. Right. So, but we're figuring out how. And right now we're seeing numbers spike inside of the civilian world. And we as veterans, 9 times out of 10, that suicide comes with some form of a lack of purpose, a lack of identity, not having that mission anymore. Well, if you're somebody who's experienced that or gone through that and overcome it, now your mission is to help other people with that. Like, you can easily make that a mission, and it doesn't detract from who you are or what you're doing. It doesn't make you look like less of a person, but there's a whole community out there that has no clue how to deal with it. And we took an oath to help and protect, those inside of the United States and those outside. And so I think, if we can really change the conversation of suicide to say, it's not a bad thing, right? Because some people will judge and be like, oh, well, did you really go through that hard of a thing or whatever, right? Who gives a fuck? You don't own it. You don't know it. Like, I don't know what's inside your head. Like, something as little as something as little to me as a dog dying could be completely detrimental to you as an individual. And that's fine. Because like I said earlier, no one owns the book on trauma. My foster care story isn't every foster kid's story. But if you're not going to share your story, then you're depriving someone of what they need.
So true. So true. Yeah. I feel like that vision piece that sits at the root of a lot of people's problems, is not having a clearly defined vision of the life that you're trying to create. And I feel a lot of people are scared of the term, creating a vision for my life, because I think it's got to be this massive, like, because they see the people, online or on social that they're following or that they look up to, and they're like, oh, I could never be that person with the house and the success in the business or whatever it is that they're doing. And they realize, like, no, your mission can be literally to be the best mother to your children. If you're I ran a marketing agency last year, and I remember we had a graphic designer on the team. And I mean, we had an amazing team. I mean, our work reached millions and millions of people through our clients and all the work that we did. But we had a designer. He was an incredible person and just this amazing heart, but he was depressed all the time. And I remember just having a conversation with him, like, realizing, like, dude, your work is visual, and it's the first thing that people see when they see our work. Everything that you're doing is reaching millions of people. So just realize that you are having, because I think his thing was like, he didn't really feel like he was having a big impact on the world. And I was like, you got to realize, like, the work that you're creating is being seen by millions of people, and it's generating millions of dollars for our work and our client. And like I'm saying, like, I think so many people just miss the piece of having a direction in their life, or living with intention of where I'm trying to go. And when you are living with intention or living within purpose, then the addiction, it's easier to manage that, or it's easier to kind of get over the feelings of depression. And I'm not saying that depression clinically or chemically is not there. And sometimes you do need some medicine, or you do need some, some drugs to help with that. But I think a lot of people's, it's just, they don't know where they're trying to get to. So they feel like they're not making any progress. And that's what leaves them with these feelings of depression or just uncertainty. So yeah, that's
100%.
huge. Let's get into what you're doing now. I know you have, your coaching and consulting, where you help businesses in using some of these interrogation tactics. And then you have the podcast you mentioned a few times, Real Talk with Roman. What led you to getting into the coaching business, and how are you kind of integrating, let's call it, maybe some of the interrogation principles or tactics that you learned into your work? And not speaking directly to business owners, I was sharing offline here. What are some of these principles that people can just, really translate into life, communication, in all facets of life?
Yeah. So I'm about effective communication, and actually I'm working on a book about effective communication. It'll come out in the future. And definitely I will keep people updated as that happens. But what really it is there's three key things to effective communication. It's planning your conversation, right? And quick summary dive into that is not going into a conversation completely clueless, knowing the type of communicator you are, knowing what you want to talk about, what your goal and your outcome is, right? Just like we were just talking about life vision, you need to have a vision for every conversation. Where are you trying to go? Because if you think about it, the average person has 30 conversations that are about 10 minutes, not including what they do on social media. So not including the message per day. Not including the messages that you send people, or the little like response to post or anything like that, right? Not including those little pieces. These are like verbal. And obviously the numbers are probably a little different with COVID, but point being is somewhere around that is what you're having every day. Now, out of those 30 conversations, how many of them are effective? How many of them did you actually achieve the goal you wanted to achieve? Or did you just go through the motions, right? Because we have breathwork coaches to teach us how to breathe for when we're running or doing whatever, right? So why would we not think that we need somebody to teach us how to communicate? Because we do it as much as we breathe. And so for me, that's where that kind of piece comes in. So the first piece is effective planning. There's a lot more into it. I go through some steps of how to do it. And then, the parallel for business, right? It's planning how your mission statement sounds. Does your mission statement align with your policies and procedures? Do you communicate those policies and procedures out in an effective way, right? But it applies whether you're talking to the person at Starbucks who makes your coffee, or you're talking to thousands of employees, right? The same concept, have a plan, right? So you have your plan, and then you have to actually create a safe space to interrogate. Just like we talked about Maslow, communication is about safety. Because when you break it down to the fundamental, a conversation is either I am giving you a safe place to talk, or I am taking away your safety, right? Go back to the punching a person in the face analogy. If I'm punching you, you're either going to fight back or run because I've endangered your safety, right? You have to respond. So the same thing goes for a conversation. If I create a safe environment for you to communicate, you're going to be open and honest. You're going to get real and raw about things, right? You created a safe space for me. I talked about the various deep traumas I had on a deeper level, right? Had you not created a safe, comfortable space for me, probably wouldn't have talked about it in that level, right? Because I don't feel that level of security that I can be raw and authentic. Now, me as an individual, I'm going to do that anyways because bug it, I don't care. But point being is the average person would not. So you have to create safety. Now, I say you have to create safety because while you can take safety away from a conversation, 9 people out of 10 do not need to be pulling safety from a conversation. We need to be giving more safety, right? Mm-hmm. So think about the instances where you would pull it out. It would be inside of interrogation, maybe. It would be, when someone, you've tried every other option with an employee, and now you're like, hey, I'm going to have to let you go, right? That would be kind of the moment where the conversation may be less than safe. But 9 times out of 10, for most of us, we're creating unsafe environments because we're responding emotionally. We get angry because of what someone said. We get hurt because of what someone said. And so then we just respond, we react, right? But back to that plan in your communication. If you have a plan, now when someone says something mean, you've thought out the conversation. So you know that they might respond that way, and you know how you're going to respond. So now you're not taken off guard and just moving into it. You have an actual plan, right? And so you're constantly, because that plan, you can constantly operate in a space of creating safety. Now, like I said, you can take safety away, but key thing, you can always ramp a conversation up. It's very hard to ramp it back down. So always start with trying to give safety, right? So safety and communication is the second point. The third point is review your conversations. And let's go back to the Starbucks barista. As simple as asking for a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Did you ask for it the way you wanted to? Did your body language portray it, right? If you want to come across as a dick who doesn't want to be interrupted, did you do that? Yes or no? If you came across as a sweet, kind person, you said you wanted to get one other piece of information out of the person other than, your coffee order. Maybe you wanted to know where they went to school or where they grew up. Did you achieve that goal in your conversation? If you did, what things made that able to happen? If you didn't, what things kept you from achieving that goal, right? We review our fitness plans every month. How did we do on our fitness? We track our sleep. We track our macros. We track all these different things. But how often are you looking at the conversations you're having? Think about it from a spouse point of view. Did you communicate with your spouse in a way? Did she respond the way you wanted to? Did she totally misread what you said, right? Because those are just as important. When someone misread your conversation, now that's something for you to say, hey, I need to adjust this area. I need to fine tune it, right? This is how we become elite optimized performers. This is how the military does it. This is how athletes do it. So why would we not do this in our business or personal life as communicators?
Yeah, 51 conversations, 51 of them. And we finally get to the point where we actually talk about conversation and communication. But as you're saying this, I'm like, I'm thinking here, like, okay, Frank, you kind of talk for a living. You're a communicator. So, I have weekly conversations with people, always sit down and plan them, like there's always a goal in mind before we sit down to record. Sometimes I go deeper into that process of creating a plan. Sometimes it's more of an organic flow, like what we've done here today, but then creating a safe place, just kind of quiet, here we're obviously just recording this through Zoom. We've done some in-person stuff. We just want to make the person feel safe and comfortable. If somebody's going to sit down with me, hand them a glass of water, ask them if there's anything they need. But then the review piece, I've gone back and listened to 50 plus conversations multiple times, looking for areas of improvement, looking for things that I could say, looking for, did I interject too quickly there? Should I let him kind of carry on with that story? And I hope my goal is, you guys listening can share with me, especially if you've been around since the beginning. Have I improved as a communicator? I guess that's more of an ask from me. Now, I want to just dial in a little bit closer to the planning piece, because you talked about these 30 conversations a day. Some of those are going to be planned out. When you start your day, I have a list of people that I'm going to talk to, already scheduled today. But I got to assume that maybe half of these 30 conversations just happen. They're not planned. So how do you, in your teaching, or how can somebody, if they're gonna, if they run into a random person, how can you build in some planning when it's just happening kind of, with just
I love it. I love it. This is a great question. And so the point to that is no conversation is completely unplanned. And when I say that, it's because you know who you are as a communicator, right? And you ultimately know, like, if the mailman comes up to drop, let's go with Amazon, right? Because they're dropping off more. If the Amazon person comes up to drop off a package, how are you responding to them? Are you even saying anything to them, right? Did you miss an opportunity to stretch your communication muscles, right? So part of our not planned conversations are sometimes us actively avoiding a conversation, right? So when you're planning, all you're doing is you're saying, this is the way I communicate. This is what I want to get across to a person. This is how I want to portray myself. And you're using that to build you in other areas. So I would encourage people, as cheesy as it sounds, right? And if you're in a store for whatever reason, say hi to somebody. If you're sitting in the checkout line with somebody, strike up a conversation with them. Practice it. It's completely random. It's completely unplanned. You don't know where it's going to go. But what you do know is how you want to communicate. You want to communicate in an open way. You're communicating with a stranger. So now you want to make them, you're now pushing safety really hard because you're the creepy dude who just talked to somebody randomly in the line, right? So now you've really got to bring that safety in, and you're trying to, gain information. So maybe you're trying to figure out a new fact about a person. So now that's your questioning, your interrogatives, right? So now you're going through your who, what, where, when, why. So even if you're not planning to run into that person, you're still planning how you're going to communicate with people that you may randomly run into. What stretch of my muscles am I going to do? The same way you go, oh, I'm going to do curls, or I'm going to do deadlift, right? Like it's almost like treating those random opportunities as an exercise opportunity. What do I need to stretch and improve at? Right. And then you're going to further know what you need to improve at and refine as you review your conversation. So as you're walking back to your car after you talk to the person in the checkout line, did I get that piece of information? Did I make them feel safe? Did they look at me like I was weird the whole time that I was talking to them? Right. So the plan for unplanned conversations is to strengthen your communication muscles.
But this is only going to be effective if you have a plan or vision for your life and you're living with intentionality, because without that part, which we addressed, 10 minutes ago before we got into this, dude, this is amazing right here, like real actionable stuff. But before we got into this, we talked about the importance of having that plan of who you're trying to become. So you can't think about that if you haven't started there. So guys, start there, and then you can work on some of the.
You can't communicate effectively if you are not communicating your true self. That's simple.
I love that. You said this terminology a few times. So I want to ask, you talked about communication types. So like you have your big 5 personality traits, so you can, you be more passive or more aggressive. So are there kind of, definitive communicator types? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, so there are, right? There's tons, and you can like Google types of communication. You're going to get like millions of hit results and tons of graphics and things like that.
Is there certain tests out there that's better than others?
There's like online tests. Honestly, I like to keep it a lot simpler.
Okay.
You're either an introvert or an extrovert, right? You either actively enjoy talking or you don't. But guess what? Even if you don't enjoy it, like I don't enjoy doing pull-ups, but I know they make me stronger, right? So even if you're the person who doesn't really enjoy conversation, you have to realize that conversation is a part of your life, right? You need to be effective at it to some degree. Now, maybe you're not going to jump in front of 1 million people and give a speech tomorrow, but point being is back to that planning. I know that I personally am an introverted person, which sounds so weird because I like to talk, but I still have to deal with the fact that I've had tons of trauma and I was very emotionally detached, and it still comes out in the way that I communicate with people, right? Like I have to catch myself on that. I have to actively open up myself to be emotionally raw. And that's kind of what I do now. But the point being is if you're that introverted communicator, now your plan can revolve around that. You can build a plan to that type of communication. Hey, I know that I don't like to have lots of conversation. So maybe I open up the conversation for them more so that they make me feel safer, right? So maybe I'm helping them help me. Maybe I'm just getting the ball rolling and letting them take off with more of it. And I'm just kind of flowing and vibing with them because that's more my personality type. Or maybe I really like to run the conversation. I like to talk. I like to be a part of things. So maybe I'm constantly throwing those questions and actively listening, actively learning to from the person I'm talking to, but I'm driving that conversation. I'm knowing where I want to get to, what I want to do, and I'm keeping myself in that control so I keep my interest, right? So I don't disagree with all the types like, assertive or, emotional or all of those, like those all exist, right? There is emotional and non-emotional communicators, right? But I think ultimately that goes into introverted or extroverted. Most people who are emotional would be more of an extrovert. Most people who are not emotional would tend to be more introverted because they don't really want to portray those emotions out.
That's gonna be your analytical types or more introvert.
Yep. So I'm introverted and I'm highly analytical, right? So take your ENTJ test, right? Ideally, if you're scaling more on the analytical side of things, right, you're probably more of an introverted communicator. If you're scaling more on like the emotional commander, you're probably more of an extrovert.
That makes so much sense. I've identified, myself as an introvert forever. And I mean, just, I was sharing this with Anthony last week when he was on, going back to kind of growing up and as a kid, like I was the kid that like you put me in a room with people. I'm the one in the corner that's sitting there completely quiet, not want to talk to anybody. I mean, I've had to kind of, face a lot of those fears and, like I joined Toastmasters years ago because like I wanted to start speaking. Now I literally talk for a living, but as an introvert, I still identify, you know, like if I go into kind of a social gathering, like I'm the one that you'll find in the corner, you know, maybe just in a one-on-one conversation, not in a big kind of organization group of people. Sometimes I like my favorite times of the week are just when I'm by myself, you know, just in quietness. But I definitely am analytical, but, you know, like I said, I talk for a living, but I talk, you know, usually through a camera or to one person to be able to reach, you know, thousands. Cause I feel that's been, you know, been most effective for me.
And I also think with saying that, every person should try to do at least one conversation of those 30 that's kind of outside that, right? Like if you're extroverted, try one. Because like I said, it's stretching those muscles, right? I'm not saying that I want you to totally change your personality type, because that totally deletes the whole entire purpose of having your identity and communicating within your identity. But you should definitely stretch those other muscles. Like I'm not planning to do like 100 pull-ups anytime soon, but I incorporate pull-ups in my workout because I know they're good for me. Right?
Got it. Dude, this has been absolutely amazing. I feel like I could talk to you for another hour. We'll have to have you on.
That means I'm actually a communicator.
Yeah, maybe we're both. Maybe there's something to this communication for both of us. I don't know. We'll have to get you on, man. You know, whenever that book is coming closer to an end, and obviously we're here to support and help you in any way we possibly can. I know we're gonna jump on the Real Talk here, your show as well. So. Before we wrap it up here, we have a final question we ask every guest. Let's tell people, you know, where they can find Roman. You know, obviously, if they want to learn more about, you know, some of the business consulting things or some of these communication things, where can they go to find that? You know, we didn't really talk about the podcast here, but go ahead and plug and share with us what you're doing with Real Talk and where they can find that. And then just, you know, what are the best places to connect and reach Roman?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Roman Roberts, right? That's super easy, obviously, because we were talking about that earlier. Podcast is Real Talk with Roman. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find it. You can even get your Alexa or Google Play to pop it up. Just say play Real Talk with Roman. And for my consulting, go to bluesphinxconsulting.com. And that is my consulting website where you can find out more about what I'm doing. But you can shoot me an IM or a DM on LinkedIn, on Instagram and Facebook, or Real Talk with Roman. Like literally anywhere, I'm going to connect and talk to you. I love talking to people, obviously, as you can see from this conversation. So yeah, man, just reach out to me and I will help however I can, because I truly do believe, and I got this from a guest on my show. Her name's Kelly Maxwell, and she does Campfire Coffee. She makes a really good whiskey coffee, super good. But she has a mantra, collaboration over competition. And so I don't care if we're in the same space or a different space, like there's something we can do together and learn together. And so if you want to talk, let's talk.
Yeah, I love that collaboration piece. I had Dr. Trish Lee on a few weeks back, and I'm planning on setting up a second interview. But, you know, we're both in the, you know, the porn addiction recovery space. And I'd reached out to a handful of different guys that are, you know, out there. Like, we're doing the same work. We're both helping men. There's hundreds of millions of men struggling with pornography addiction. So not stealing anything from you, but it's like they had this weird thing where it's like, oh, I don't want to go on your podcast because you're the competition. And I was like, no, we're actually fighting the same fight. Let's just get on and connect and collaborate. So
yeah, man. And I think everyone, you know, and I think we do a really bad job of that. And I think sports, like, you look at the NFL, right? You see like these teams that are competing against each other, but what they don't show as often is like after the game, those two different teams, they'll hang out with each other. They're talking to each other. They're doing stuff. Like, we're not in this crazy different space. Like, yeah, we may, you know, I may drop an episode on Wednesday the same time as someone else, and I may want more views to mine than theirs, but guess what? Like, there's billions of people. We got this.
Amen. Yeah. If you're worried about one person being stolen from you, you're
missing the point. You're missing the point.
Poverty mindset. That's all that is. So,
definitely.
Yeah, guys, we're going to link up all of his links down there below. I definitely recommend checking out the podcast. You know, I've had quite a few of you reach out to me like, Frank, your 60-minute episodes, they're too long. I got to split them up. Roman's figured out 10 minutes per episode, jam-packed, actionable. You know, you can, you know, listen while you're in the shower, you know, on the drive to work. They're 10 minutes, but you get so much out of it. So
it's good for a warm up. I've had some people tell me that they use it for their warm up time. So they'll start the episode.
There you go. Yeah.
Do their warm up. So every Wednesday they use it as their warm up timer instead of their regular one. So that kind of pumps me up.
Well, Roman, brother, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate, you know, your openness, your honesty, your ability, you know, to not become a statistic. I want to acknowledge you, you know, growing up in, you know, in the environment that you did, and having to bounce from home to home and not really finding yourself, not really knowing who you wanted to be. You didn't let that hold you back. You obviously still went through some trauma with the military, and didn't make the best decisions post service, but you've cleaned it up, and now you're have an amazing impact on the world. And I know this is only the beginning of what's really going to be a long, prosperous life for you. So I appreciate you coming on here today with me. I know that this is going to help so many people. So we have a question that we end every episode with. I shared with you a little bit before we recorded, my journey. I know we're going to come on and do an episode for Real Talk. But for me, growing up, I didn't have faith in my life. There was no relationship there. And that led me to, really struggling, for a long time, living a life of addiction, living a life really shackled, to the flesh. And it wasn't until, found Christ and I partnered, with Christ in life, that I was really able to kind of step into what I feel real freedom is. And ultimately, when I talk about living a superhuman life, it is a belief, it's a belief system, maybe a way about life. There's no real definitive way to define what that ultimately means. But I like to ask every guest at the end, like, just how would Roman define living a superhuman life?
Ooh, that's a good one. I truthfully would define it as being true to yourself, because for me, that was my biggest problem, right? Like, I didn't have an identity. I wasn't being true to myself. And in being true to myself, that did bring me back to religion. That brought me back to a lot of things. And that also pulled a lot of things out of my life. I think people think in being true to themselves, they still have to keep everything. Not everything is meant to last forever, right? Like, we call our lives a book, but then we don't remember that sometimes the key character gets killed off in chapter 2, right? Like, you can drop some shit and it's okay to drop it, and other shit you're going to carry, and that's fine. But you can't do that until you know who you are, and you have to figure out your identity.
Powerful, powerful, powerful. Brother, I appreciate you guys. You heard it here from Roman. Be true to yourself, live with intention. Guys, go back and listen to the last 20 minutes of this conversation multiple times. If you're struggling with having effective communication, if you're struggling with getting out of conversations what you ultimately want out of it, because we dropped a ton of value here. So we appreciate you guys. Like we end with every single episode. If you want to help us continue to grow this mission, continue to grow this message, you can help us in 2 very clear and specific ways. First off, if you haven't done so yet, make sure to give us a like or subscribe, whatever platform you're listening on, whether it's Apple, Google, Pandora, Stitcher. Just subscribe to the podcast so you're notified every Monday when the new episodes are out. Rate and review it as well. If you're finding value out of these conversations, drop us a comment down there below. That tells the algorithm that people are enjoying this, and it puts it in front of more people. But then most importantly, if there's somebody in your life that can benefit from what Roman shared here today, or from any of our guests before, just share this podcast with as many people as possible. But without anything else here, guys, just Frank Rich for Roman Roberts. We'll see you next week, and we love you all.